or after some major illness. Or maybe it was breaking the chain of abuse in the family, in your family of origin. Whatever it was, likely a large part of the reason you prevailed was because someone believed in you. Because someone believed in you. Now, many of you know this, but I was born with a medical condition known as club feet, and I think we've got an image coming up there. Essentially, what club feet is, it's a condition that affects the bones around your ankles and your feet, and they can be very distorted, as you can see in the picture. And the treatments for children with club feet will vary depending on the severity of the condition. Mine was very severe, and so it required surgery. When I was born in 1969, conventional medical practice was that the surgery on children with club feet would begin when the child was age 2. I was born in the States and had a medical doctor, Dr. Green, who had a different approach. He thought that you should start the surgery much earlier, which I believe is the practice today. But in 1969, this was just brand new. He said, start the surgery earlier before the child learns to walk on distorted limbs like this. It started earlier, before the bones become rigid. And so literally, after my mother gave birth to me, and they cleaned me off and so forth, they handed me to my mother, and the doctor told my parents that very first time she held me that I had this condition, and by the way, could I please operate on your child immediately? And so within 2 hours of being born, I was on the operating table, and they were breaking bones and resetting them. And I went through several surgeries between birth and age 5, where they essentially did that each time. They would break bones and they would reset them. And then between surgeries at night, I would sleep with this foot brace on with a bar in between. Some of you may have seen it. And that was supposed to also help correct the distortion in my limbs. And my mom tells me this story. I don't remember it. But apparently the first time that I had surgery, so I'm just, a couple months old when they're taking the cast off, she brought me in to have the cast removed, and they use this medical electric saw to remove the cast, and I freaked out, right? I'm screaming and screaming, and my mom's crying, and they finally get the cast off, and she's like, I don't want to go through that again. Is there any way that we can remove these without the saw? And they told her that if she would soak my legs in a tub for 2 or 3 hours, that the plaster would get softened and she could unwrap the cloth that they used to make casts. They probably use the same thing today, I don't know. And so that's what she did for each subsequent surgery. She would soak me in a tub for hours, and then she would spend all the time to unwrap that, and then she had to clean all the plaster out of the tub. At any rate, you can imagine that I didn't grow up a normal kid. And now it explains a lot, right? Especially for the first 6 years, as I was in and out of surgery. Beyond that, I had to go to school with the reality that I had several significant, noticeable scars on my legs. The longest one that I have now, it goes down the whole length of the front of my lower leg. It's 7 or 8 inches long. And I've got well over 100 stitches in my legs. And as I was growing up, I remember many times people would say, you can't because you've got club feet, or you had club feet. You had this condition. But all along, my mom believed in me. She said, you can. You can. She continued to say, you can. Also, in spite of being constantly in casts up until the age of 5, the legend is that I was the fastest kid in my neighborhood on the big wheel. So I'd be going down the street in Grand Rapids, Michigan on my big wheel with casts on. These little casts pumping up and down. And then throughout elementary school and high school, I excelled at cross country and at track and field. I won the district high jumping each year that I went into it. And to this day, I'm a bit of a health nut, as some of you know. And that's in no small measure due to the fact that I know what it is to be in a hospital bed and to look out a window and see kids running around and playing and not being able to do that. I know what it is to have pain in my legs because I've been sleeping with a brace all night trying to correct bone conditions and change things. And so I don't take it for granted that all of my surgeries were done in the States. My parents spent more on my legs than my dad did in grad school. Only the last surgery that I had was in London, Ontario when I was 5 years old. So I don't take it for granted. Now, the reason I'm telling you this isn't to brag or to say, look at me or how great my parents are or whatever. And certainly not to say that I'm such a great athlete. The point of this story about my childhood is this: that the story wouldn't have had the ending that it did were it not for the fact that my mom believed in me. She continued to believe in me, and she verbalized that all the way through my childhood. And so rather than this disability, this condition that I have becoming a setback, it was just a motivation for me in my life to prove people wrong and to prevail against challenges. So the first word kids need to hear is, I believe in you. I believe in you. Not just kids born with club feet. All kids need to hear this. Because when a parent or some other adult of influence believes in you, you start to believe in yourself. Your self-worth goes up, your confidence goes up, and that's an important thing. And you'll be glad when your kids hit their teen years or adolescence or when they go off to university that they have some self-worth and confidence. And I know maybe you're listening, you're thinking, okay, Darryl, this isn't rocket science. I believe in you doesn't sound all that complicated. But the message that it conveys actually is very complicated, very complex. We don't think of it oftentimes, but the kids in our homes, the kids that we interact with, they're listening to our conversations. They're listening to our conversations even if they don't act like it. And along the way, there's curiosity about what mom or dad thinks of them. In fact, the question, what does mom think of me? What does dad think of me? Is one of the most persistent questions that kids grow up with. And when the question isn't answered to their satisfaction, kids can spend their lifetime wondering if they have mom or dad's approval. An author named John Eldridge wrote a book, a best-selling book called Wild at Heart. And if you're a man, I would encourage you to read it because it's an excellent, excellent book. And he expands on this point about the importance of this message. He writes this: Adam and Eve's fall into sin sent a tremor through the human race. A fatal flaw entered the original, and it's been passed on to every son and daughter. Thus, every little girl and every little boy comes into the world set up for a loss of heart. Eldridge goes on to say that even if they don't give evidence of this, every boy longs to hear, you have what it takes to be a man. And every girl grows up longing to hear comments and constructive encouragement that they're making progress toward maturity. Kids need to hear this word, I believe in you. And we fail to communicate such messages to children, and they'll grow up missing that healthy self-esteem, that healthy self-worth. And they're going to look for it from others, which may or may not be a healthy thing. So my encouragement is express your belief in your son or your daughter. Do it early and often. And if you do, confusion will yield to self-confidence. Take it from Duke University legendary basketball coach, Mike Krzyzewski. He's a big fan of the power of I believe in you. He says, those 4 words can mean the difference between a fear of failure and the courage to try. The courage to try. Who would have thought that a kid born with club feet would win districts in Simcoe County every year that he participated for high jumping, of all things? Telling your kid that you believe in them goes way beyond those canned, overused statements like, you're a great kid, right? You hear it all the time. You're a great kid. We think we're giving a compliment, and we are. We're well-intentioned. But it's cliche. It's common. And because it's common, it's easy for kids to dismiss it. It doesn't lodge itself in the memory of a child. But when you tell your daughter or your son that you believe in them and you back it up with why, it is not soon forgotten. In fact, sometimes it will be in their memory the rest of their lives. I want to give you a half a dozen tips from Stahl's book about how to communicate belief in your child.